there YouTube, this is Vargas XX78 with my comic book collecting tips, part 2. Just continuing this series of comic book tips. Just my way of trying to help people out if someone is interested in starting collecting comic books. I've mentioned this before on YouTube, there's way better videos than mine, but if these videos help someone out and they get started in this wonderful hobby, that's cool. That's very cool. So, last video we talked about how to go out, search for your comic books, and figure out what comic books you would like, and read the first couple of issues. So, let's say you got home, you read the comic books you bought, and you decide that they're awesome and you want to keep collecting them. Now, if you were lucky enough to start buying a series that starts with an issue 1, then all you have to do is monthly buy each following issue. Buy 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. But if you bought one of the longer running comic book characters, like say Amazing Spider-Man, as you can see, they're in the 684th issue. So if you want to collect comic books, you're going to have to go and track down 600 issues of Amazing Spider-Man. Me personally, I prefer, this is a single issue. This is your standard 22 issue comic book. So there's 683 issues prior to this, not counting miniseries, not counting the annuals. So you're looking at a massive comic book collection of single issues. If you want to collect, or if you're actually going to try and collect all the older issues, if you're on a budget, there's two things I would suggest. Because single issues tend to get really pricey. Especially the older issues, and especially if it's some important issue like the introduction of a new character or the death of a character. So if you're on a budget, I would suggest that you go track down older issues at the comic book conventions. I personally buy my comic books, at least the older ones, at the dollar bins at the comic book conventions. Very rarely do I buy them in the 50-cent, unless it's series I'm not really that interesting, I just want to read the stories, because the 50-cent bins, the comic books are not in the best condition. Some of them actually are, but I find that the dollar bins, or even the $2 bins, have a fair condition, and they're a really good price. So I would say that, I don't know, about 40% of my comic book collection has come from those type of bins at the comic book conventions. Also, your comic book store does carry in their back issue bins. They have this section in the comic book store that has these really long boxes, and all the older issues are there alphabetically. However, the comic book stores do tend to have more expensive prices. Sometimes they do have some fair prices, so that might be another option. But if you want to collect, mint condition comic books, it's going to get pricey. Just decide if you want to collect for the purposes of profit and money. You might want to invest on better condition comic books. If you just want to collect to find out more about the character and follow what came before the comic book you picked up, go with the cheaper option. And sometimes, at least in my case, it's actually the better option, because, like I said, the comic books are not in that bad a condition. They're pretty good condition. Another thing to watch out for when buying single issues is the printing. Again, if it's a popular or important single issue, the comic book companies are going to release multiple printings. Thankfully, nowadays, you can identify second print a lot easier, because it will actually say around the comic book issue of second printing, third printing, fourth printing, and so on. Or the comic book art might be different, or for example, it might be the same comic book art, but it might be a different color. So you can identify the second prints a lot easier in the newer issues. The back issues get a little tricky, because the only way you can figure it out is if you do your research online, or if you actually open up the comic book and look inside. It will say second print, third print, and so on. So that's another thing to watch out for when you're buying older issues. Because, again, if you just want to get the comic books to read them and enjoy them, the printings don't really matter. If you're doing it because, you want to make a profit or you want to collect it for the money, track down the first printings, because those are the ones that are worth more money. So this is if you want to buy single issues. If you're also on a budget and you don't have the space for a massive comic book collection, you might want to consider going and tracking down some trades. For example, this is the trade, the hardcover trade of Marvel Zombies. This is actually a comic book series that I missed out. I saw that they were going to do it, but I thought it's going to be just a cheap gimmick. Then I started reading the reviews and talking to other comic book collectors, and they said it was really amazing. But when I finally decided to pick up the single issues, they were worth a lot of money. They were worth a lot of money and way beyond my comic book budget. Because when I went, they were already in issue 3, and issue 1 and issue 2 were already in second print, and even those were really expensive. So that was one case where I missed out on the miniseries, and I had to pick up the trade. The trades, they occupy less space. They look a little better on a bookshelf because they have the whole collection here. And other trades, they don't just trade the miniseries, they also trade important events in main comic book. For example, in Spider-Man, right now they're going through the Ends of the Earth. Or like last year, Spider Island. You can get that on the trade if you missed out on, the single issues. And again, it occupies a little less space because it is a trade. Everything's collected into one book. So if you're again on a budget and you want to keep collecting comic books, but you don't want to go through the hassle of single issues, trades are a really good option. They're reasonably better priced than the single issues. Again, they occupy a little less space than the single issues. And some of the comic book companies have trades for the way older issues for their comic book characters. Again, when you're dealing with comic book characters that have been around since the 30s, trades are a really good and cheap way to read the stories and catch up with the character. Because the single issues of the older comic book characters are worth a lot of money, so sometimes your only chance to actually read those stories are through trade. So that's another thing to consider when you want to track down older issues. So that's the trades. Now let's say that you've bought your comic books and you want to keep them relatively dust-free and without having them bent. The perfect way to maintain your comic books are through comic book bags. I have two sizes here to share. This is the current comic book size, and this is the regular comic book size. Let me see. Yeah, this is how a comic book looks in the current size. As you can see, the comic book fits very snugly inside the bag. But as you can see, well, I don't know if you can make it out, but the comic book spine kind of just doesn't have that much protection. The backboard just doesn't provide that much protection on the back of the book. However, the ones I buy the most are the regular size comic book bags and backboards. As you can see, the backboard has gives a lot more protection to the comic book. So it protects the spine and it protects the edges a little bit more than the current comic book bag. I prefer these, but these are okay because they don't occupy as much space. But again, I prefer these a lot more. Another thing is that once you're done reading your comic books, I use tape. Well, most collectors use tape on the back of the comic book bags to keep them nice and sealed and dust free. The type of tape that I use, let me just, I want to show off the brand, is this invisible tape. Invisible tape works better with the comic books. This is the one that has this kind of color and texture. Because if you buy the transparent tape, with the years, with the heat and everything, the transparent tape has this weird chemical reaction with the comic book bag, where it actually seems to start to melt. And getting the thing open is a real hassle, because it like literally melts through the comic book bag. So you might, in the effort to open up the bag, you might damage the comic book. Invisible tape, I found, works better. With the years, it eventually also has that weird chemical reaction where it actually sticks to the book, but it's not that bad. So I would go with invisible tape when you're sealing your comic books. So this is how I maintain my comic books with regulars. But another tip, let's say that you really like a cover, like this one, this Marvel Zombie Supreme. I really like the Marvel Zombies covers. I think they look really cool and really awesome. If you really like a comic book cover, what you could do is you could actually display them around your house. You could just literally grab the comic book bag and just you know, put some tape around it, and you can put it on the walls. I personally prefer to pick up some 8 to 11 inch picture frames. What I do is that that's why I have regular comic book bags. I'm sorry, the current kind. Because what I do is that those 8 to 11 frames have this little wood or backboard thing on the back. So what I do is that I just, you know, open that, put the frame, put the comic book around the frame mark, tape it around the corners, and then put it in the frame, and it gives it a really cool looking, you know, a museum quality to the comic book. Because some comic book covers are literally works of art. I mean, they are just amazing, and you know, you could put them on a museum, and they would really fit into that, because they really are art, in my opinion. So the current comic book bag gives it that nice security. It won't allow the dust to go in, and by taping it to the frame on those 8 to 11 inch photo frames, you know, it'll be secure in there, and you can put them on your walls or in your office, and it'll look like a really awesome painting. Another thing you could do is that if you go to conventions, you could actually have the comic book issue signed by the artist if he's there, and you're kind enough to ask. You can ask him to sign it, and then you can put it on the frame and display it, and then it will really feel like a work of art because it's signed by the artist. So that's another thing that you can do with your comic books to, you know, really display them. I would suggest that if you really like a comic book cover and you're going to do that, both have it signed and then frame it, pick up 2 of the comic book issues, one for your collection and then the other one for framing. I know that could get also kind of pricey, but you can only do it with the comic book covers that you really like. But that's another neat way to actually go about, you know, displaying your comic book collection. Another thing that I can recommend is that once you have a relatively big enough comic book collection, unless you have really good memory, which I unfortunately don't have that good memory anymore, as you can probably tell because I forget what I want to say. But I actually, on my computer, I designed this little worksheet. Basically, it's like this. It's just a worksheet, and I have, you know, each cell is a comic book issue. So I just fill out, like, I don't know, from 600 to 700, and I highlight the comic books that I already have, leaving in white the ones I'm missing. This would work. That actually works great, because then you can open another worksheet and just copy paste the ones that you're missing into another worksheet, print that out like I have here, and then that way you can keep track of the books that you already have and the ones that you're missing, and not double buy a book. And then you can either print this or download your worksheet to your iPhone, and, you know, go to the comic book stores or go to conventions and just cross out, look for the books that you're missing and cross out the ones that you've already bought. That's something that has really worked for me, because again, my memory is not that good, so I tend to forget what I have and what I'm missing. Sometimes, especially with the longer running books. So these little pages have really saved my life on a whole bunch of conventions, because that way I know what I'm looking for and what key issues I need, or just what issues I need to complete my comic book run. So you might also want to try this out. But I think I'm going to cut this video here, because again, I don't want to bore anyone with really long really long videos. Like always, thanks so much for watching, and until I see you all again, this is Vargas XX78 signing off.